Today we're going to be talking about how important it is to simplify your subject before we start painting. And we're going to take a look at the Italian landscape painter Canaletto and how he simplified and figured things out before he put brush to canvas. Today we're going to take a look at how important drawing is in our painting. Drawing to prepare before we paint, but also maybe drawing for drawing's sake. We have an artist we're going to be looking at who did both. And I'll start with a few of my drawings that I do beforehand, before I start painting. And the purpose of this is to, like I've said before, the drawing is not an end in itself. It is to help make the painting more simplified. Not necessarily easy, but definitely more simplified. Because if we look at a reference like this one, and this is back in the days when you had to take the film out of the camera and make little prints to paint from. Thank goodness we're done with that. But this was a print, and I never had painted it before. I'm about to start painting it now. But doing thumbnails of this, thumbnail drawings, to simplify the shapes, maybe move some things around to make a better composition, and also to simplify the value, reduce the number of values, because that's what detail is. Detail is smaller value changes. And if I can look at this photograph and see, 7, 8, 9 values, darks and lights, then if I can simplify those values from 8 to maybe 3 or 4, then that's going to make the painting a lot easier. And that's the purpose of it. But also, I think just drawing for drawing's sake does a couple of things. It really sharpens your eye for composition and proportion, and to be able to pull things together in a painting. And also just drawing for drawing's sake. I think you don't see as many drawings in galleries these days, but maybe we should. We're going to take a look at an artist that did that. He drew for both purposes. One was to paint from, because he didn't have a camera. And he didn't paint outside, I don't think, but he did draw outside and use that as his reference. Now this photograph is an old photograph from border of Arizona. There's a ranch down there. And a lot going on. Fence is really busy. All those fences made with 1,000 little pieces of wood. There's just a lot of stuff going on, and I want to simplify it. The best way to do that is to simplify with a smaller thumbnail drawing. And in the thumbnail drawing, I'm doing a couple of things. I'm simplifying the shapes and values, and I'm also deciding on the shape of the canvas I'm going to use. So the photograph is more horizontal, and I found after doing several drawings that a vertical would be best. So instead of an 8 by 10, it would be a 10 by 8, where everything is more about the height of the pieces of wood for the fence, height of the tree. Everything is kind of tall. That's important. Where in the photograph, there's a lot that's stringing out horizontally, but it's not that interesting. This is the interesting part right here, and it's more on a vertical kind of format than horizontal. So doing that and then simplifying this to 3 values, like I've mentioned before in some videos. So I have the light of the paper, which is all the sunlit areas, and then I have 2 shadows. Lighter shadow of the tree and the ground, and then the darker shadow of the horse and the fence. And this makes it just easier to recognize what's going on. And if I can start my painting with these shapes and values, it's going to be a lot easier to paint. And I think it'd be a lot easier to look at or read when you're looking at a painting. If you can simplify shapes and values, it's much easier and pleasing to look at than quite so much detail. Here's a photograph from Greece. Very detailed, very busy. There's a lot going on. A lot of value changes, 3 or 4 different lights and 3 or 4 different shadows. But if I can reduce it to 2 or 3, I'm going to be able to paint it a lot better. And of course, figure out the composition, I don't have to paint everything in this photograph. I can zoom in, crop out a lot of things that just aren't necessary. And I'm just using graphite here and a sketchbook. And here I've got still just 3 values. I've got one light, which is the value of the paper for the sky, the water, the sunlit areas on the ground, the shrubbery, and the buildings. Then I have 2 values of shadow. I mean, maybe you could pick out 3 values of shadow or dark, but basically 2. The darker dark and then the lighter dark. Now I did use a stump here, and that's the it's kind of rounded paper that's kind of pulled together real tight. Some of it's more pulp and some of it's paper. Either one. It's kind of like a stick, or it looks like a pencil, and it just rubs the graphite. And I've done that a little bit. It's kind of like painting. Sometimes I will have graphite powder in a jar, and I'll dip it in there, and I'll use that like a brush. And I've done that here in some of the shadows, just to smear it into big shapes instead of just using the point of the lead. It's kind of helpful. But simplifying that, cropping things, not worrying about things that aren't that important, just simplifying. The more you can do that, the easier it is to paint. This is a photo from a video we took in Scotland, and I'm finding videos a little easier to work with than photographs because they have a bit more to them. This one's a little blurry, but yeah, I can crop or stop the photograph or the video and just screenshot it and take an image. It's kind of quicker than snapping a bunch of photographs. But again, I want to simplify this, especially the foreground water, using some of that stuff in the water, some of the shrubbery, some of the things going on in the mountains, but simplifying it at the same time. And here I used pen and ink. And I start with pencil first, just lightly use the pencil to scribble in or gesture in just the big shapes really quickly, maybe 30, 40 seconds, just to, for placement of the bigger part of the castle, placement of the bridge, the water, the mountain, so on. But you just put the pencil down and just lightly start scribbling. So that in 30 seconds or so, I don't have a perfect drawing or an outline at all, but I have placement of big shapes. That helps you see mass instead of outline when you just take the pencil and just put it down and you start scribbling. Because the scribble fills in volume as opposed to looking at the shape and trying to find the contour or the outline. Nothing wrong with contour or outline drawing, but for painting purposes and for getting things down quickly, it's better to see the volume or shape than outline. It's also more accurate in the drawing to do that. Here's one from southern Utah. A lot going on here. I was kind of more captured with how the light hits the cliffs and the tree, a little bit on the fencing here, the corral, and kind of zoom in like that. This is a bigger scene that I can zoom in and get rid of some things. Because my focus, again, is going to be more mountain, tree, and a little bit of the fencing. So here, the drawing, I'm just finding the shadow pattern on the cliffs and how they interlock with the light pattern. So a simple dark and light pattern. This drawing is just 2 values, a dark pattern and a light pattern. And simplifying, the fencing down here in the corral is still somewhat complicated, but it's a lot more simple than that. I just don't have to render this as I see it. I want to render it in a more simple idea that reads better to someone looking at the painting than the photograph. It's another one here in Colorado. Early morning, very cold, working out. I think, again, compositionally, because of the tall trees and the mountains being tall, I thought more of a vertical or square. This is actually more square than a longer rectangle. It's also in Colorado. Again, a lot going on here. Too much foreground. Although I like some of this foreground, I do want to zoom in to what's more important and just see that. And instead of all the values that I see in the mountains and the trees and on the grass, just pulling it together into 2 values. Well, I probably got 3. 2 darks, lighter dark and a darker dark, and then the white of the paper. This is my focal point, the fallen logs and the tree in the foreground. Background mountains and trees are secondary. So this is my focus here. A good exercise is when you do these, whether you do these drawings from a photograph or do them outside, then try and do a painting from the thumbnail drawings. Because you should have enough information, like enough information here to get a good block in a painting. Now, I'd have to make up my color or try and remember the color, paint from memory. But the color's not that important. I want good color harmony, but more importantly, I want a good value sense of the colors. So no matter what colors I choose for the buildings, the trees, the mountains, the water, the sky, and so on, no matter what color I choose, I want it to work as far as the values go. And that's a good exercise to do. And I usually do those paintings small also. Sometimes just the same size as the thumbnail drawings, which can be anywhere from 3x5 to 8x10 or 6x8, something like that. Because they're just an exercise in color, trying to figure out what colors are going to work value-wise, and then just use colors that are more harmonious or work together. Now, all that to be said, let's look at an artist. His name is Canaletto, and he's a Venetian painter, born in 1697 in Venice, and died in 1768. Now, he was born Giovanni Canal, which I'm sure that's not how you pronounce it in Italian. So imagine canal in a Italian accent. But his father was a theater set designer or painter. He did set designs for operas and theater. And that's what Giovanni did his first, I think, till he was 20. He worked in his father's studio and really learned to paint there. And there's kind of a theatrical feel to his paintings. But he ended up changing his name to Canaletto, just so he wouldn't get confused with his father. So it must have been really famous set painter. But his paintings are really interesting. This was before John Constable, before Corot, before the Impressionists, before landscape painting, I think, really started to take a foothold. And I really find his paintings really interesting, really well done. The atmosphere is really nice. Brushwork, not necessarily in this painting, but his brushwork is very, in some instances, kind of loose. So kind of before his time. And I hadn't heard of him before till I was at the Met. Took a picture of some of his paintings at the Metropolitan. But great sense of value, atmosphere, and could really handle detail. Now, I have no desire to paint this much detail. I mean, that is incredible. It's really well done. In some sense, it just has an architectural rendering feel to it. And I don't care for that, but it's just done so well. This value variation in the foreground, being able to suggest the stonework here in the plaza, and the subtle value changes in the simple dark and light of the plaza or the ground floor there. Really well done. Some of his paintings, a bit looser. I really liked this one. We're going to get to what I really want to talk about with him in a minute, but just to look at some of his paintings, that's really nice value-wise, because he's got subtle changes in light value that's being hit by the sunlight that go from really light to really dark, but they all stay in the light. And then he keeps these darks more uniform and somewhat simple, but a lot of variation in the lights. And there's almost a looseness to his brushwork in this one that I really like. And again, a little before his time, there was a painter in England called Bonington, about the same time, and his work reminds me of his. You should look up his work as well as a watercolorist, oil painter. It was really, really good. Way ahead of his time, and died way ahead of his time. I think he died in his early 30s or late 20s. Here's another one here. Again, we're going to get to the drawings in a minute, but just a great job with values and temperature, color, and the way he painted detail. Again, I have no desire to paint things this detailed, but they're so well done. A lot to learn from that. Just a couple more of his paintings. Again, more of an architectural rendering, but handled so well. Some of these he did I liked more close in of some buildings and figures. But what I really want to get to is his drawings. And he would do these on site and use these to paint from. And his drawings have a lot more looseness to them and kind of a nice feel to them. Kind of more of an artistic feel rather than a architectural rendering feel. I mean, he really knows perspective and showing form in the landscape or the ground or the hill in this case. I mean, just reads real well. And his way of working here is to do a light pencil drawing, very lightly, kind of like I talked about, just putting the pencil down and not lifting it up, just put it down and start scribbling. Till you lightly just scribble in the form, and then you come back and do a little bit of outline to refine the form with the pencil, but not much, and just go right to the pen and ink. And of course, he didn't have a pen and ink like we have now, but it was a quill with a bottle of ink. And I don't know if he did the drawing outside and used the ink inside. I imagine he did the ink outside as well. A lot of his drawings that are more of cities, they found little pinholes in the drawing about where the horizon line is and the vanishing point. And you would stick a pin where you want the vanishing point to be with a string on the end of the pin. And then the string would string out. And you could use it like a ruler to get the right perspective of like the top of a building, the top of a window, the bottom of the building, bottom of the window, and use that string because the perspective line changes as you go up and down on the building. And that's how he would find the perspective. Now, I did find some articles on him that talked about him using a camera obscura, which is a little box that reflects the image on some paper, and he would outline. Probably did use that some, but even if you do use like a somewhat of a camera obscura or something, a projector to trace, it just doesn't help very much. I mean, I had to learn to use it in art school when I took some illustration classes because you had to have your paintings done yesterday. So the quicker you could get down the drawing by just tracing it, the more you can get to the painting. And I just didn't find it that helpful. It did speed up the drawing a little bit, but I don't think it's helpful. But he did do a lot of these drawings as finished works. This might be one, but this also looks like a drawing for a painting because it has everything he needs there for a painting. But using that pen and the string helped him figure out how he's going to set up the perspective. This is a real nice one here. The other thing he would do is, again, lightly sketch things in with a pencil, use a little bit of brown ink in this case, and then the black ink for washes, for like the cloud shadows, shadows on the building. But the brown ink is more the outline, but much more creative feel in his pen and ink drawings and his paintings. Although I like his paintings too for what they are. It's also a nice one here. Also used a ruler, from what I understand, and or the string with the pen to get more of a straight line. But this beautiful drawing. Treat drawing as much anymore as a finished work of art, just painting. But again, using these for paintings, so there's a bit more on a lot of them than just what I'm showing in my drawings of trying to reduce all the values to 3 or 4 values. He's doing complete finished drawings because these are his photographs that he would paint from because they did not have the camera. So he would paint from these. And I think that's why a lot of the artists in the old days could draw much better than we can now because they didn't rely on cameras. This might be more of a finished drawing for drawing's sake. Looks a lot more like an etching, but this is a pen and ink. Could have been used for a painting also, but signed this one, so could be more of a finish. He did a lot of drawing for clients of cities. Now here also the lines here, and if you're going to use a camera obscura, why bother with finding the vanishing point and using the string to find the right perspective lines? Because you got the camera obscura to tell you where the lines go. So my guess is he didn't use it often, if he did use it. Another with the brown ink and the washes, placement of the boats and figures. A lot of detail, but again, these were used for the whole painting. Whereas now I take a photograph, I can do some thumbnail drawings where I simplify it, and I'm using both the photograph to get some detail and then the thumbnail drawing to show how I'm going to simplify things. Where here the drawing has to do everything. There's somewhat of a simplification in the values, but there's a lot more detail because it doesn't have the camera to pick it up. Nice cluster of boats there and the shadows on the buildings. Now here's an example of a finished drawing he did. I would guess on the spot because here's the painting. Again, painting doesn't interest me that much. I like a lot of his other paintings better. But really made a living of doing a lot of these buildings, street scenes. Lived in England, I think, for 12, 15 years and had a large clientele that just wanted him to do scenes of London. He was called a postcard painter, and then also did them in Venice as well. But it's the drawings that attract me, the way he's able to simplify what's really there and still get a lot of detail there for the sake of the painting. Because just a copy of photograph, you're never going to render everything or render it very well if you try and put everything in there. So you have to simplify and decide what's important and what's not. Just a good, this one's really nice. I like this one. Nice feel for the line, simple shapes and values. Now this one also looks like a more finished drawing. That is drawing for drawing's sake. This was a piece of art that he probably did on commission. He did a lot of commissions. This is in Venice. But very detailed, very time consuming pen and ink drawing. And one here probably more for painting because of the brown ink and the washes with the black ink. Anyway, that'll do it. He's a really good artist to look at his drawings, the way you can just look at one of these drawings and see how he's simplifying things, adding some detail because, again, these are his photographs. So anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.